welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm Jeffrey Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And Dr. Lopkin, I guess really in the news this week, we have the unfolding of the Space Force. We'll put that on hold for a second. And then we have basically the special election in Ohio. Here's what I really think. I believe the Republicans are going to win. It may be a recount because it automatically triggers that. I think it's much ado about nothing. I think he was actually behind until Trump had his rally to basically shore up support. So that's my take on it. And I also think that this Democratic wave was a reality 6 months ago. Now I don't see it that way because of the whole socialist leaning. They have that woman Cortez, whatever her name is, she's a complete buffoon. Bernie Sanders, I think they're not helping themselves out. What do you think?
No, they're certainly not helping themselves out. In fact, the election in Ohio actually shows how difficult it's going to be to get this blue wave going. Because even though this was a very conservative district, the Republican is still ahead, and he's probably still going to win. But
he's going to win, yes.
But the Democrats poured tons of money into this.
Tons, and George Soros money as well.
Yes. Well, the fact of the matter is, come November, they are going to have elections all over the country. They're not going to be able to focus their resources this way. So they're not going to be able to do this massive push in every district.
True. I think they really focused on this. Again, another thing is, some of these candidates, like this candidate, was not exactly the greatest ever either for the Republican, whatever his name is. I saw him on a couple of interviews. He's not exactly the greatest thing since sliced bread either. Which has been the case. Whenever there's even the senatorial seat. They had it all wrapped up with some guy, I forgot his name, it's 6 months ago, whatever, and then they get Roy Moore. I mean, really?
Yeah.
Psychopath.
They have not been putting up quality candidates, and I think that's going to be a problem in the long term.
But when you look at that, though, I think the real problem's on the Democratic side. First of all, their bench is really old. The people that are younger are very questionable. Like the superwoman from the Bronx is, I mean, the more she opens her mouth, the more it's like, how does she even get out of college? My God.
Yeah, no, she's proving to be a huge embarrassment to the party.
Embarrassment, but they're in a bad position because they can't say she's a nut because the party has become a nut party or hard left. And if they ever said, if anyone tried, like let's say Chuck Schumer, tried to disavow her or disassociate with her, there'd be hell to pay. Hell to pay.
Well, and that election's actually going to be really interesting because the incumbent Democrat, who she beat in the primary,
is running as an independent.
He's still on the ballot. He's got the working families ticket, and he's still running. So the same way here in Connecticut a number of years ago, Ned Lamont mobilized the wacko left part of the party to beat Joe Lieberman. Joe Lieberman then came back and beat him in the general.
And beat him soundly.
Yes. So it's going to be very interesting what happens there. Can the incumbent Democrat, who was quite a bit more centrist than this wacko, can he pull the party back to the center?
I don't know. It's a very interesting concept. I think with the biggest fascinating aspects to all of this, Dr. Lopkin, is the millennials. This big chunk, as big as the baby boom generation, believe it or not. And I think
actually it's officially bigger.
Bigger, okay, yes. They're driving. They grew up under Obama. They grew up under the Great Recession. They grew up on the banking controversies and scandals, and they're hard left. And
yes, they are.
They're the biggest part of the Democratic constituency, and they're not going away. I mean, they grew up living in their parents' basements, a lot of it no fault of their own, but that's what it is. So I think the Democratic Party is hard left, and It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. I think that she's going to win, and I think she's going to further push the party to the left. It's like your example of Connecticut is perfect, because what works in the party doesn't work nationally, and that's the big problem. That's the huge problem. Bernie Sanders, first of all, Bernie Sanders, the more I see him, the more he aggravates me, quite frankly. He is an opportunistic. He has very little depth. He's a one-trick pony, the 1%. God, even the New York Times interviewed him and was aghast at how little he knew about anything else but the 1% that he's fixated on. And he is in the 1% anyway.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's a bad joke because he has no idea how anything actually works.
Yes.
And quite frankly, he was the only thing in the Democratic primary that made Hillary Clinton look good.
True. Well, they had the other guy from Maryland. He was no genius either.
No.
O'Malley. He was pretty bad. We're being entertained by a group of Army people running by as we do the podcast. So we celebrate our enlisted people. Speaking of the Army, what do you think of the Space Force?
I'm actually torn about it. I see the need for it, especially for securing our satellite systems. We know China and Russia have Hunter satellites up there, so we've become so dependent on these satellites for cell phone calls, for GPS. I understand the need for a defense force to take care of that. I'm not 100% convinced that a separate military unit is actually needed. I think that's going to add a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of overheads.
Yes, bureaucratic layers and also costs. Yes, and just like our current military, you basically have repetition. You have 10 different planes doing the same thing that one could. Whatever, it's going to be each one wants their own fiefdom. So it's very interesting.
I would rather see all 6 branches, well, now 6, including the Space Force, branches of the military actually merged into one coherent unit.
Yes, because there's been, through the years, through the beginning of the Cold War, each one needed their own plane, their new versions, it's very, very, very repetitive and not very financially sound, if you're fiscally sound.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot I think the big item in the news, Dr. Lopkin, is certainly the blue wave. Is it true or not? I want your prediction. Do you think it is a blue wave or not?
I don't think there's going to be this massive blue wave. I'm not sure if the Democrats will pick up enough seats to take the House, but it's certainly not going to be this overwhelming thing that they're hoping for.
But they do take the House, then there's going to be constant hearings in terms of trying to undermine Trump. You know that, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Although I'm hearing more and more that nobody expects the Democrats to pick up seats in the Senate. And in fact, the Republicans will pick up seats there. So the Senate hopefully will be able to keep the House in line if the Democrats do manage to take it.
My prediction is the Republicans will squeak out a narrow victory and enough for 2020 when Trump wins again and carries with him the House.
Yeah, I honestly don't think the Democrats are going to take the House. They may gain seats, but they're not going to gain enough to win.
And speaking of that, what happens to the CNNs of the world? Will they freak out? I want to see that. I want to get a glass of wine and watch that. If it doesn't happen, they will be beside themselves.
CNN will freak out. CNN wants nothing more than to get rid of Trump, to make him look bad at every opportunity. CNN actually came to Connecticut this week. A reporter from CNN went into a bar in New Britain because Paul Manafort is from New Britain.
Yeah.
And there is a street, Paul Manafort Drive.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, the CNN reporter walks into this bar with the goal. She wants to ask people what they think of Paul Manafort Drive and should they change the name of it. she didn't get a question out before the entire bar was taunting her about, oh, fake news is in the house, fake news is around.
I think from a marketing perspective, maybe we'll pick it up next week. CNN, as a famous movie in the 70s, went a bridge too far. They just went too far with that myopic focus on impeaching or disrupting Trump. They're not taken seriously anymore by not just wackos, but by mainstream America. Do you agree? Which is reflected by their ratings.
Yeah, you take a look at the ratings. People have tuned out in droves.
Well, Dr. Lopkin, good discussion. We'll do it again and see what's going on for next week. But again, never a dull moment, is there?
Nope, there's always something going on.
All right, take care, Dr. Lopkin.
All right.
You've been listening to Carnivore Radio's podcast. You can catch us here every week. Carnivore Radio is part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can listen to the podcast at blogtalkradio.com/Xvadio. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can listen to us live every Friday at 4 o'clock on WESU 88.1 Middletown, Connecticut. You can also catch us online at WESUFM.org. We look forward to hearing from you and see you next week.